Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mike's, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock every day, and our co-sponsor CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory prices and delivery of cards for Magic Online. I'm Evan Irwin, and we get started this week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
Keep going.
Ruben
This is staying
Bressler.
in the show. This is staying in the show. Yeah, how's it going, everybody?
It's going freaking great.
We are having a great time. Aaron couldn't quite
You know
leave
what?
at the door.
I'm proud of Aaron. She kept it in the whole time.
For most of your intro.
We had a crazy pre-show, and I just haven't quite recovered from it.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
We've barely recovered.
Yeah, if you watch that pre-show, there's still tears in my eyes.
Yeah,
it's still
a lot.
It's still in there.
I'm so sorry, everybody. You two's gonna be so mad.
Oh my God. All right. That said, we begin with our choice of the top comment from last week in a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who was the most eloquent and letting us know what card we did not choose as one of our top 10 Theros Beyond Death cards. Ruben?
We had some really good comments this week, but this week's winner is going to be West Robinson. Seriously, all this talk of older cards and older formats, and you leave out the call to one of the most famous cards of all time? Nyx Lotus should have had some amount of fanfare and appreciation. Nyx Bloom Ancient got all the love, but tripling the Lotus's mana output as well should put it over the top. Not to mention it goes great in any sort of devotion strategy that will come from this set, which I am sure we will see. Of all the cards Evan had meltdowns over when recalling when the rocks were soft, this was a huge miss in my mind's eye.
Yeah, I gained a new appreciation for this card. I was one of the people that didn't see the big deal. You know, I didn't think it was going to be a big thing. I didn't think it was any good. And then we did our early access event, and one of you built a mono blue devotion self mill deck.
Yeah.
That I just sort of picked up at the end of my shift, and I was like, all right, let's see what the boys built. I saw this deck and I loved it. And you pair it with the Kiora that lets you untap a permanent, and I was making stupid amounts of mana, and I was like, oh, this is good. And so I have a new respect for that card now.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Nyx Lotus is a 4 generic mana legendary artifact. It's a rare from Theros Beyond Death. It says it enters the battlefield tapped, and you tap and choose a color, add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion
Like those.
to that color. Yes.
Yep. Essentially, yeah.
And you want to be able to do stuff with it, like twiddle it, and untap it and do things with it, which you can do with Kiora, which is great. Right. And being able to tap it twice in one turn is usually just backbreaking. Yeah. It's a hell of a card, no doubt about it. I love it. I think it's great, and it's definitely come out as. And I agree with you. For what it's worth, I didn't expect much out of it either. I was like, it seems pretty cool, but 4 mana coming to play tapped these days, it better
in
do
this
a
economy.
lot.
Yeah. I mean, if Firemind's Foresight or Firemind's artifact that costs 4 that comes into play tapped isn't seeing play, how much hope is there? Firemind Vessel, that's the one.
Yep.
Isn't seeing play, and that's a guaranteed 2 mana that fixes you also. Mm-hmm. How good could this possibly be? Turns out it's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty freaking good, and we certainly appreciate you pointing out to us, West. Congratulations. Please contact Erin on social media before she blocks you on all of them. Thanks again to CoolStuffInc.com for sponsoring this giveaway, and stay tuned for our top 10 list this week, and maybe you too can win next week's free gift certificate. Yay. So thanks for Cool Stuff for that. But that means we get to rock and roll on our top 10 pump spells.
Yeah.
Now, so I wasn't really sure. I have some enchantments in here, I'll be completely honest. Sure. And I have the usual instants and sorceries, and I even have a creature too. So hopefully that's fine with you guys.
I mean, we didn't decide ahead of time what pump spell means. We did auras relatively recently, so I don't have anything like Rancor. Okay. But I could definitely see something like Boon Satyr or some sort of combat-oriented permanent go in here. Basically, and I have a couple of loose ones as well. Maybe not loose, but my definition of pump spell isn't just target creature gets plus numbers.
Just giant growths, yeah.
Just giant growths all the time. I have, it turns out, I think I have all instants, but I wasn't necessarily going, oh no, I have a sorcery at least. All of mine are spells. All of mine pump the creature, or creatures. But it's a little bit of a give and take into the definition thereof. So yeah, it's a different definition depending on how you quantify it.
Okay. Actually, well, if we go in here to my number 10, I'll show you. This is one of my kind of outliers, and this is my only sorcery spell. I tried to sort of filter it of a target creature gets until end of turn. That was kind of like my phrasing. Went through all the instants and sorceries for that. And I came upon this card, my number 10, and I was like, I couldn't, like, when it came out, it was so awesome. And when we talked about it and when you could just reference the card and you never had to explain what the card did, because all you had to do was say what was on it, what was happening to it. Because at one point in time, there's this warrior and he punched a bear. He punches a bear.
Bear punch. Yeah,
Savage Punch is from Khans of Tarkir, and it's from a warrior of some nature. I think Mardu just...
Sirach? Isn't it Sirach?
No, I think it's Sirach. I think it's a teamer, because it's a ferocious spell, right?
Yes. You're right.
So
This is
it's
Sirach. Yeah, so this is Sirach, which is awesome. Punching a bear for a green and generic mana. It's a common sorcery that says target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. But if you have ferocious, the creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn before it fights if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. And it was just so much fun. We couldn't believe it. They're punching bears. Did you see the bear punch thing? And just bear punch was just like a thing for months. Yeah. It was awesome.
Yeah, people were fascinated by this card.
I mean, there's an unstable card called Really Epic Punch. Yeah. It is a bear punching a dragon. So...
There's been this sort of like back and forth crazy punch things, and then you punch things, and then there's like the bear suplex card or whatever that was printed
bear
recently.
Suplex was out muscle, yeah. Savage Punch was definitely the meme of the set, and so well deserving, and it's also a unique. The Savage Punch effect was not common before this, and so both of those reasons.
Very nice. All right, so Ruben, what was your number 10?
So my number 10. You all know how much I love it when you have Pro Tour pedigree, and this is a pump spell that pumps your entire team, and did in fact have a Pro Tour win. In fact, 4 decks in the top 8 of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica had at least 2 copies of Pride of Conquerors in the deck. Colorless and a white for an instant from Rivals of Ixalan.
Yeah.
It does have a send. Creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. If you have the city's blessing, those creatures get +2/+2 until end of turn instead. And so this was a great way to end games alongside
Was this a standard Pro Tour?
Oh, yeah. This was a standard Pro Tour. This was the Boros Aggro Pro Tour when everybody was running Snubhorn Sentries and heroic reinforcements and History of Benalia and things like that. This was Andrew Ellenbogen beating LSV in the finals.
This is
and Pride of Conquerors is a great little pump spell.
It's a pretty big pump spell, particularly when they get +2/+2. That's just game breaking. This is one of the most pushed pump spells, like wide pump spells. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like not just one creature gets it. No, everybody gets +2/+2. There's the Rally of Wings or whatever these days, but they have to be flying. This is just everybody. Count your permanents. If you got enough permanents, your opponent's probably dying. Like that's how it works. You play this when you swing for the win because that's the type of advantage it will give to you.
Yep.
This card is super duper cool. That said, Aaron, what's your number 10?
My number 10 is not particularly good. I don't think it ever saw any constructed play. I don't think I've ever seen it in Commander either, but I love it just because it's so damn flavorful and it's black. My number 10 is Homicidal Seclusion. So Homicidal Seclusion is an enchantment from Avacyn Restored. It costs 4 colorless and 1 black. It says as long as you control exactly one creature, that creature gets +3/+1 and has lifelink. That is so cool. And then the flavor text says, damned crows and their endless squawking blocks out the voices in my head. And so it's perfect. The horror trope of the person who lives by themselves and is very delusional. And if they're by themselves, they get that boost and they get that lifelink. And so I had a lot of fun in Limited. I think I might have opened this during a pre-release, but I just love this so much.
This card is ridiculously powerful. Because it's an enchantment, it's not an aura, so it doesn't require you to stick it on any one particular creature. It's just, so as long as you can just control one, it's the best thing you got. So you'd play whatever your best thing at the time was, and you just keep beating them with it until they killed it, and then you'd play the next best thing you had, and just keep beating them with it was ridiculous. This card could get out of control.
And this was kind of what Black did in the set. And so this was a bomb uncommon if you were playing Black in Avacyn Restored Limited, which was tough to do because it was the one color that didn't interact with the other stuff, which was kind of the point. But this card in particular was one of those cards where you opened it and we were like, oh, we're in. We're ready to go.
And this thing stacks. Do note, this is some very powerful stuff when it gets going. That said, I'm moving here to number 9. Mine is higher on someone else's list, but...
So is mine. Mine is also higher.
I've got this.
Oh, Aaron, what's number 9?
My number 9 is a red card even, Ruben, so you're going to be really proud of this one. So this was a card, we've seen this type of effect before, but it's really the second sentence of this that sets it above the rest, and they don't make them like this anymore. I think it was only reprinted once or twice. I'm looking at it was in 4th edition, 5th edition, and that's it. My number 9 is Bloodlust.
I knew it.
So Bloodlust is 1 colorless and a red. It is an instant. And it says if the original printing, target creatures gain +4, -4 until end of turn. If this reduced creature's toughness below 1, creature's toughness is 1. So we see buffs like this all the time of +3, -1 or +2, -2. You know, Augur Spree was a card for a while. And so we've seen this plus power minus toughness thing before. And normally you want to be very careful that you're putting it on creatures that can take the hit. But this one doesn't care. It just puts their toughness at 1. That's so cool. I love the art on it. This is old school and cinematics. But this is just a really, really cool way to do pump spells that we don't get anymore.
I appreciate that they haven't tried to replace this art, you know? Every single version has the Antimatics art, which is awesome. Super iconic. When I first got in the game, like, Bloodlust was a big deal. This is one of the biggest pump spells that existed back in the late 90s because nothing went +4, like maybe +3 with your giant growths or whatever, but not +4. That's crazy.
2 mana for 4 damage is a lot.
That was a big game back in the day. So getting through no blocks, Bloodlust, like, you know, or, you know, Bloodlust plus Berserk or whatever, like there was a ton of combos.
Bloodlust plus Berserk was the big one.
That was the big that you wanted to put together and really impress your friends with and stuff. And like this is a card that's just pure nostalgia for me. I love this card. I thought it was great. Fantastic. All right, let's move on here to number 8. Ruben, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is a interesting metagame card. What they wanted to do was they had a slot where they wanted to be able to take care of specific enchantments that existed in the metagame at the time. But they didn't want it to be dead against all matchups that didn't have enchantments in them. They wanted to have something to do. This was Pro Tour Chicago 2000 because the main 2 decks were Rebels and Fires. And so you wanted to be able to answer the Saproling Burst. You wanted to be able to answer the Fires of Yavimaya. You could even answer a Rising Waters if you really wanted to. But you didn't want to be dead in the Rebels mirror. And so what you did was you put Wax and Wane in your deck, 4 of, in the main deck, including in Kai Budei's winning list. Wax and Wane is a split card, originally from Invasion. Wax is a green mana instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Wane is a 1 mana white instant, destroy target enchantment. It did everything you wanted it to do. It was a workhorse, and it was just a solid card.
And at the at Pro Tour Valencia, this was like, and this was an extended tournament or whatever. Like this was the card of the morning of the Pro Tour. Back when you could still change your deck list right before the event started, everyone was like, "Where are the Wax and Wanes?" The Enduring Ideal deck had just exploded.
Yep.
And they're like, "We need to find them now, so I can do something in my zoo deck that can both pump my guy when I care about it, or I can just kill their enchantment when I need to." That was huge. I mean, we're talking like they were selling this uncommon for like $20. They were buying it for 10. If anyone had any, you could sell them that morning. The instant the tournament started, back to a nickel. But right then, you could not find any.
That'll happen
Wanes.
sometimes. Finding those morning of Pro Tour cards where your common Yavimaya barbarians went for $5 the morning of the Pro Tour.
Yeah, just people were looking for stuff.
Yeah, cracking packs, looking for commons and uncommons.
Right, because this doesn't really exist anymore. There was an entire culture of, at the morning of the, like, you know, the day before the Pro Tour, everyone's testing, everyone's talking, everybody's looking around, everyone's noting stuff, who said what, who's got what in their binder, oh, so-and-so doesn't have such and such, so maybe they're playing it, and in the morning of, the chatter just gets even more intense, and people really start going, okay, what was who and so-and-so playing? All right, what's the best thing we do? What if we sort of switch up this? Like, people scribbling on their deck lists, like, that was what I saw basically every time I went to the Pro Tour.
Same.
And now it's like, well, you know, 3 days before we see all the deck lists.
Yeah, everybody's submitted and tweeting about their lists. And I mean, it's a gentleman's agreement, but it's certainly less interesting when you're on the floor of the morning of the Pro Tour.
Oh yeah. And those type of like excitement moments, that was really interesting to me. I thought that was, that was part of the culture I thought was really great. Because the same thing would happen at smaller events. You know, you'd be at regionals and people would be scribbling on their deck list or whatever. But, you know, they also did it at the Pro Tour. That's crazy. And they did. Aaron, what's number 8?
My number 8 is one of 2 hires on my list.
Well, okay then. I'll get to close out number 8. This is a card that was part of a terrific set. This was a card that harkened back to a terrific mechanic that some say literally every mechanic is just a version of this mechanic. But they have only printed it in that one set. They printed it again in Modern Masters, one of the Modern Masters, but there's no doubt about it. If you're going to really mess with things, like there's one thing to say that Vines of Vastwood kind of has like some play to it, right. but note really carefully how this pump spell is worded. Okay, for 1 green mana, it's an instant. Okay, it's a common from Zendikar. It has kicker, which again, every mechanic is just kicker or whatever. So it has kicker for a green, so you may pay an additional green as you cast this spell. Target creature can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control this turn. If Vines of Vastwood was kicked, that creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. So let's wind that back a little bit. Mm-hmm. What does that say? That says target creature. That doesn't say target creature you control.
Yep, it's a weirdo.
You can target their creatures to give them basically hexproof, which then nullifies them trying to target their stuff with equipment, with auras, with abilities, whatever.
Splinter Twin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's terrific. And that type of flexibility is what made this thing just like good to great.
And they haven't, and that was unintentional because they've never given this kind of interplay at instance being for 1 mana to green ever again.
Right.
They intended this to only be used on your creature, but because of the wording, it's, I mean, obviously this is most seen in decks like Infect, and decks that really want to get damage in, but it had those corner case scenarios where you could counter a Splinter Twin for a green mana. You could, interact with a Bogles player, for example. And yeah, this card's spectacularly good.
And the Kickstarter cost is so low. Like normally Kickstarter is a hurdle that you have to jump over, but this is fine.
That's right.
Yeah, the kicker cost is low. The pump ability is huge. At the time, being able to play around with it that way, this is for me. This is a happy accident. This is like, oh, there's a lot more play to this card because you didn't do what you thought you did, and now it's a lot more interesting.
And I think it also got a lot better when Become Amends came out, which we might talk about later. But in situations like that, you're more than happy to just burn it for the 1 if you need to protect something. If you happen to not have the kicker available, because it's still a card that you can feed to Delve and then do something even bigger.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on here to number 7. Aaron, what's number 7?
My number 7 is, obviously a pump spell. It's a bit of an anthem effect, but it also has some reanimation action happening, which I'm completely here for. I first played with this card in the Daxos Precon deck. I don't know if it came with the deck or if somebody suggested it, but either way, it did end up in my Daxos deck, and I had a lot of fun not only triggering Constellation with this card, but bringing some creatures back from the graveyard too. My number 7 is Marshal's Anthem. So Marshal's Anthem is an enchantment that was printed in Worldwake, 2 colorless and 2 white with multi-kicker, speaking of kicker, of 1 colorless and 1 white. You may pay an additional 1 and 1 white any number of times as you cast a spell. Creatures you control get +1/+1. That's the flat Anthem effect. When this enters the battlefield, return up to X target creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of times Marshal's Anthem was kicked. So it's a little expensive, but if you happen to have the money to burn on this or the mana to burn on this, you can also, just get some reanimation along with it. And then those creatures come back, and then they're a little bit bigger too. So this is good stuff.
Back when I had a Rasputin Dreamweaver EDH deck where I had a gazillion mana laying around, I must have multi-kicked a Marshal's Anthem 7-8 times, just get everything back. This one's a hidden gem. I'm not sure that it sees much play anymore, even in Commander, but yeah, it's a fun one.
Yeah, this is like Kicker is amazing. Kicker finally came back in Dominaria, which was great because we hadn't seen Kicker, I guess, really back since Zendikar. Yeah. That's the first time they brought it all the way back. And multi-kicker is, it's an extension of Kicker, the best mechanic, or like arguably the best mechanic that's ever been made in terms of it's just derivative of everything else, or everything else is derivative of it. Marshal's Anthem is super sweet. I want to see more multi-kicker. I thought it was great. They only did it the one time.
Yeah.
They did it World Wake and that was it. And I was like, I mean, I can understand it's a little bit narrow, but like really once ever and that's it?
Right. I mean, it's got a generic enough name that you could obviously bring it back,
It's true. So. All right. Ruben, what's number 7?
My number 7 is a card that I have cast many of, and a lot of people have cast many of, because it was extremely popular. It was a part of a cycle that was extremely popular. Its mode of pumping is, maybe the least impressive of the modes, but it was probably the mode that was chosen the most. It's Dromoka's Command. For 1 green and 1 white mana, you get an instant that lets you choose 2 of the following. Prevent all damage target instant or sorcery spell would deal this turn. Target player sacrifices an enchantment. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. There's your combat trick, your pump. And target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. So in Abzan Mirrors, for example, you would play your turn 2 Den Protector and then have it fight your opponent's Warden of the First Tree or whatever. You could also put more counters on your Hangerback Walkers. I mean, this card just did everything that you possibly wanted any card to do. It was in the Celestia Megamorph decks, the Abzan midrange decks, the Celestia aggro decks, the Bant decks. It was in any deck that could feasibly cast it because it was so much for so little.
This is what I thought you were talking about when you had Waxer Wayne. Like, you were building up to it. You're like, you need to get rid of an enchantment, and you need to make sure the modes aren't dead. Right. And I was like, Dromoka's Command?
Yeah.
No.
Well, that was kind of the original, the OG, really.
That's
Dromoka's Command. Like, if you look at Dromoka's Command now, and you're like, okay, seems reasonable. At the time, this was insane. At the time, this was a power spike. We hadn't seen a card this good for this little mana, this flexible. You do this stuff in order, so you give a +1/+1 counter to your Siege Rhino, and then you killed their Siege Rhino with it, which was super sweet. All the things just kind of worked with Dromoka's Command. So the power level of Dromoka's Command is kind of like our standard power level these days, but at the time, all of those commands were insanely pushed for what they did and the amount of mana that you had to spend on them. This card was nuts. Like, this card was.
And it was the perfect read on like the metagame too, because you had the Constellation decks at the time. You were either playing like Sidisi Whip or you were playing Black Green Constellation. I was playing Green White. So there was, like I said, it was very rare that any of those modes was dead. There was always some use for it.
Right.
This card won a Pro Tour as a 4 of twice, 2 different decks.
Nice. Target player sacrifices an enchantment is such a interesting way to put it. Like, you don't give them just, disenchant or demystify or whatever. You say, look, you have to choose what you got, and sometimes there's only one. But if they get to choose, I always felt that was really interesting about Dromoka's Command. All right, so we'll move here to my number 7. Oh my goodness, don't we love broken stuff? We love broken things, right? We do.
Yeah.
We don't. But we do. We do until
we
do until it's like 5 weeks in the season and we just hate life and we're like, what are we doing with our lives right now? And this is the worst thing ever. Okay, fine.
We like doing broken things. We just don't necessarily want you doing broken things.
Right. The fun's on this side of the table.
Yeah, right.
But as we have said many, many times on this very podcast, Phyrexian mana is broken. Phyrexian mana is busted. Phyrexian mana is not. It's almost like the anti-color pie. It's like you wanted to take an effect and you wanted to say, you know what? I don't care if you're in this color at all. Not even like a little bit. We're not even hybrid manaing. You can just go ahead and pay 2 life and mutagenic growth, whatever you want to. And that's bad. I mean, I don't know how someone who is basically married to the color pie, like Mark Rosewater, didn't just like die on the hill of like, what are we doing when I can pay 2 life and get +2/+2 out of this green card out of nowhere, no matter what deck I'm playing? Absolutely insane. Mutagenic growth is a green Phyrexian mana, which means it can be paid with either 1 green mana or 2 life. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. That's it. That's all it does. That's all it needed to do.
This ended up fitting. I mean, obviously the Infect decks wanted this, but where this card really shined was in the Death Shadow decks, where they used to call them Suicide Zoo back in the day before it became, just Death Shadow. You wanted to hurt yourself anyways, and so you would take your fetch and you would pay the extra 2. You didn't care, and on top of that, you'd pay 2 for a Thoughtseize. And so this is exactly what you wanted to be doing. You wanted to be paying that 2 life so that you would knock your life down and your Death Shadow would get bigger, thus making your Death Shadow bigger. Like, it was just the perfect synergy right there.
Yeah. And I am of the opinion that if you own a cube and you want aggro to be good, you put a mutagenic growth in your cube. Mm-hmm. It is such a blowout. The better the cards are, the better mutagenic growth is.
It's true.
Because they're like, oh, just bolt your 1/2, and you're like, haha, gotcha. or like mid-combat. You're trying to make Zoo work. You want mutagenic growth.
Right.
It's really good in any of those. Is It Blitz really used this card a lot. Even decks like Blue-White Delver used mutagenic growth.
Yeah, the mutagenic growth, the idea that you can, particularly in Cube, for example, like this will always go in your red-white decks. This will go in your red-black aggro deck. This will go in your white weenie or whatever you drafted to mono-white. Like you can always run mutagenic growth. It doesn't matter. That's the power, and that's also why it's wrong. That's why, like, I don't understand New Phyrexia. Like, I understand Future Sight, you know what I mean? They were just going completely haywire. Whatever crazy ideas you want, you get. But New Phyrexia was just like a weird aberration of what was going on in Magic.
It's true.
It's ridiculous. All right, let's move on here to number 6. Goodness gracious. It just so happens that of all the pump spells in all the world, I share my number 6 with Ruben.
Yes.
Oh, geez.
And it's obvious to see why we share our number 6, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those spells that I can't, like, I honestly could not really believe it at the time. I thought it was, like, the fact that we had already went through Delve, you know, and Delve was a mechanic, and you're like, you couldn't, how big does this pump up? What? Because, and luckily, I guess you can go back and watch, you know, my original reaction to this card, I believe it was next to Brad Nelson, and we did the set review of like, what in the world is Become Immense? What is this spell?
Yep.
What does it do, Ruben?
So Become Immense costs a total of 6 mana. It's 5 colorless and a green. It's an instant. It's an uncommon with the originally from Khans of Tarkir with Delve, so you're never paying retail. Which means that for every card you exile from your graveyard while casting the spell, pays for a colorless, and target creature gets +6/+6 until the end of the turn.
That's a gigantic boost. Like, that's insane.
That is a lot.
You're never going to pay more than
1 mana. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, in Constructed, you'd never pay more than 1 mana. But even in Limited, you'd pay 2, maybe 3. Like, it's ridiculous. This kind of giant boost for this little amount of mana. Okay, they're like, they want Infect to be good. I get it. Here you are.
This card, most famous, of course, in Infect, as a lot of the pump spells are going to be the best pump spells of all time. This did win a Pro Tour in Red Deck Wins in a Tarka deck. A Tarka deck wins. But yeah, this was a fun of in Martin Dang's red green aggro.
Yeah, there were even calls for this to be banned, you know, right before Gitaxian Probe bit the big one. You know, Infect was everywhere, and people were coming up with, you know, all sorts of things in terms of what is the card that can hit this deck without necessarily obliterating it. And people were going, you know, yeah, we can deal with like a Vines, you know, we can do it with whatever, but, you know, the fact that it's so easy to delve and it's so easy to make this happen, you know, people thought that was the target and ended up not being. But also sees play in sort of the Death Shadow decks, and you're putting a lot of chaff into your graveyard between the Thought Scours and the fetch lands and things like that. So it's very easy to get this thing online.
Yeah, and the fact that Gitaxian Probe would just be like, do you have anything? Oh, you don't have anything. Well, I'll draw a card and kill you now because I know you don't have anything. And they had to pay 0 mana for that. They didn't really have to put any investment in making that happen. But this card is fan-freaking-tastic. Our number 6, it's always crazy to me when, of all the pump spells in all the world,
I mean, it costs 6. It gives +6/+6. It felt like it had to go at number 6.
See, you do that stuff. I don't do that stuff. I don't think you understand.
You think you don't do that stuff, but your subconscious mind
is working.
Is on a level. Your delta waves communicating through the internet.
I guess it's on your level, as the way I'd put it, right?
I did that last week with the Nyx Blue Mansion. I had it at number 3 because it triples everything.
That's right. There you go.
Y'all do weird stuff with the numbers. I like
that's why we work so well together, is because you don't.
I'll keep that in mind in the future.
Yeah, you don't do that, and we do, so we make up for that. It's fine.
No, that's great. It's neat. Aaron, what's number 6?
So my number 6 is a card that I cast quite frequently in Standard. It was from the original Thero set, and obviously, if you look at it, it really needs no explanation as to what I was doing with it. My number 6 is Night Howler. So Night Howler is 1 colorless and 2 black. It's an enchantment creature horror, 0 power, 0 toughness. If you cast it just as a creature, it actually is bestow 2 colorless and 2 black. I should cover that. If you cast this card for its bestow cost, it is an aura draw with enchant creature. It becomes a creature again if it's not attached to a creature. And it says Night Howler and enchanted creature each get +X, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards. So towards the end of Theros Return to Ravnica Standard, there was a very simple black-green deck that was running around with Nemesis of Mortals and Deathrite Shamans and Shadowborn Demons. And the goal was just to sort of use Grizzly Salvage and Commune with the Gods and fill up your graveyard and then just make these really big, beefy, fatty creatures, paying 2 for Nemesis of Mortals and then, slapping this on something and making it really big. And if it happens to die, well, you still have this big creature to deal with. And so this was really a lot of fun to play with. Obviously I would slap this on some Shadowborn Demons and have a good time. And I really like this. It was one of the few cards from Theros that I really think positively of. I didn't really see a lot of bestow, but I certainly bestowed a lot of creatures with this. And I just like it. I think it's great.
I mean, for what it's worth, I am currently enjoying Theros Beyond Death more, I think, than I did the original Theros. For a variety of reasons. Bestow is neat. I understand they want to sort of make a split creature.
But it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's kind of confusing. It's hard to explain sometimes. And mainly it's just wow, that's a lot of words for you. Just wanted it to also be an aura, but okay.
Right.
Well, then it has the weird insurance policy where it's if the creature dies, this is now a creature. And
right.
It's what?
Well, I get why they did bestow. It's because they wanted auras to not feel bad. You didn't want to get 2 for 1 for the entire card type.
Right.
And so this is a nice insurance policy on not having, your cool effect go away entirely.
Right.
When you're trying to learn Magic and really want to play Battle Cruiser, this is a good way to do Battle Cruiser. Mm-hmm. I am not entirely sold that this ability will not be returning in Ikoria.
Really?
Bestow. Yeah. I mean, if you want Land of the Behemoths and you want Battle Cruiser Magic, something like this perhaps could come along.
I mean, this is the kaiju magic, right? That's where we're getting
kaiju magic. That's right.
We're all going to be controlling Godzillas and stuff.
Yep.
Which is going to be sweet.
We're going to Jaeger up. That's right.
Woot woot.
Oh, geez.
Oh boy. Let's move on here to number 5. Aaron, which number 5?
Number 5 is a card that I played with again in Theros Standard. I was playing green-white enchantments towards the end of that standard. Won my first game day with it too. And one of the cards that I was using was this little number. It also relies on the graveyard because of course it does. But it also had Constellation and a really neat way to kind of play with it. So between Constellation and graveyards, my 2 favorite things. I loved this card. Again, another effect that makes you see how big you can get something. And number 5 is Strength from the Fallen. So Strength from the Fallen is 1 colorless and 1 green. It's an enchantment, and all it says is Constellation. Whenever Strength from the Fallen or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So it played very well with the deck. You had a lot of cheap enchantments. Sometimes they were dead, so you would just indiscriminately cast a Silk Wrap, or you would indiscriminately cast your Nyx Fleece Ram, and then something you're giving your Eidolon of Blossoms +2/+2 or +3/+3. So all of these seemingly useless creatures suddenly get really, really big. We were also running Starfield of Nyx, and so this was an ETB. Whenever it enters the battlefield, trigger these things, and so it wasn't hard to get this thing going. It wasn't hard for it to spin out of control, and it was just fun.
Yeah,
these style of effects like Strength of the Fallen, Homicidal Seclusion's another one. I've played a lot of Sight of the Scale Lords in my what is that creature? The Bant Walls deck.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean the ones that trigger at the beginning of your attack step every turn as sort of a choose your own adventure combat trick that just stays around forever. I love these effects.
Yeah, Sight of the Scale Lords, for those who don't know, is a green and 4 generic mana for an uncommon enchantment that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control with toughness 4 or greater get +2/+2 and gain vigilance until end of turn.
Right, so if I have my Arcades, that's the card's name, my Arcades in play with a couple of Wall of Runes, like some crappy O4s, that's what I'm looking for.
Very nice. All right, Ruben, what's your number 5?
My number 5 is another card that has a bunch of, my number 5... I almost screwed up. My number 5 is the last hire I have.
Ooh. All right, then. Then we move on to my number 5. My number 5 is a iconic card. This is definitely from the world of old man Magic. This is old school. This comes from the 90s, okay? It was awesome. And it was awesome for a few reasons. In particular, one of them being that I love the flavor text on this card. The flavor text on this card is unique, and it is like so over the top. Allow me to say it now. Quote, I will flay the skin from your flesh and the flesh from your bones and scrape your bones dry, and still you will not have suffered enough, says Graven Ilvek to Gerard. My number 5 is Hatred.
And my number 8.
Nice. That's a great entry.
Yeah. My number 5 is Hatred. Hatred is a 2 black and 3 generic mana. Note, that is exactly the amount if you Dark Ritual and then play another Dark Ritual that you will have in your mana pool. It is a rare from Exodus that says simply, as an additional cost to cast this spell, pay X life. Target creature gets +X/+O until end of turn.
It's so black because, black more than any other color really uses life as a resource. We see it when it comes to drawing cards. We see it with Necropotence, and we see it with even Read the Bones today. That's something we think of. And so it makes sense that that resource could also be used to make creatures bigger. And so, if you know that you just have to get through with this thing and that's all it takes, you're willing to knock yourself down to, 10 or even 5 if it means getting through and ending the game.
This was the original Suicide part of Suicide Black back in the 90s, as you mentioned. Basically, you play any 1-drop, pay almost all of your life. You pay 19 of your life and give your 1/1 plus 19 plus O and deal 20 to your opponent.
That's how it works. Just boom, boom, boom.
And Evan, by the way, this card costs 5, and it's your number 5. So let's talk about what your subconscious is trying to say.
My subconscious is telling me a lot of things because I'm telling you, I did not think about that at all. Not even a little bit. Moving here to number 4. Aaron, what's number 4?
My number 4 is a pump spell that a lot of people forget about. They forget that it's a pump spell because they're so wrapped up in what the rest of the card does that they forget that sometimes you can just cast it for its second half. And I have won games by doing that. It was in my first Modern deck ever. My number 4 is Violent Outburst. So Violent Outburst is 1 colorless, a red and a green, and is an instant from Alara Reborn. Bet you didn't know it was a pump spell, did you? So the first part says Cascade. When you play this spell, remove cards from the top of your library from the game until you remove a non-land card that costs less. You may play it without paying its mana cost. Put the removed cards on the bottom in a random order. And oh yeah, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So the primary reason you're playing this card is so you can go get Living End. This is a very key piece of the Living End deck in Modern. And so 9 times out of 10, you don't even really care about the pump. You just want to be able to get your Living End. But once you have all those crummy creatures on the battlefield, sometimes you just need to get through. And one of the ways that you can do that is with an Alpha Strike with just this card. You can choose to just cast it. You can refuse to cast the card that comes with Cascade, and it just does what it's supposed to do. And I love the really creepy art on it. I love what it does. I have a lot of great memories of this card. And instant speed is just no joke. Just the trap of like people thinking you don't have anything. I've done this with Simian Spirit Guide is also in the deck too. So people will sometimes see you at 2 mana, and if you're playing a really aggressive deck like Infect, you can just be like, whoop! And they're like, where did that come from?
Why did you do that?
Yeah, how did that happen?
Cascade is the mechanic where I go like, did you really? You really wanted us to get free spells? That's
my favorite Cascade story was, I remember doing, I might have told this already, I'm sorry if I have, but there was a celebrity bounty event at Gen Con a few years ago. They used to do these things where they would take visible people who were at Gen Con and you could play sealed against them. And every round would have this sort of plane chase effect to it. So I remember being there one year, and the first round was like the fire breathing round where like every creature had fire breathing. And then round 2 was like the Horn of Greed round or whatever. And I remember the final round, they were like, all spells have Cascade. And you could see, like, there were a couple of Wizards people there. One of them, Gavin Verhey, who was my opponent. And you saw them just, like, put their heads in their hands. Like, I didn't know. I didn't do this. I'm sorry. Yeah. And it was just such a great moment to see sort of these new designers be like, what were they thinking? Like, we would have never approved this.
Lord. Especially if you're trying to play counter spells. And
yeah.
It's not a good,
and he was playing like a blue-white deck and just had nothing.
And they have done events on Magic Arena where all spells have Cascade. And it's hilarious. And you can build the funnest, most insane decks because you know you're going to hit that 1-drop every time. Right. It's fantastic. Violent Outburst is great. And move on here to Ruben's number 4.
That's a really good hidden gem. I like that one a lot. My number 4 is the card that I started talking about before, which has a lot of words on it. The pump effect, in fact, is a very strange pump effect, but it was the centerpiece of the Atarka red decks. This is Atarka's command. The second command on my list. Red and a green for an instant, choose 2. Once again, these 2 mana choose 2 commands. Boy howdy, were they ridiculous. Your opponents can't gain life this turn, or deal 3 damage to each opponent, or you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. You don't have to worry about that one. Or creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain reach until the end of the turn. So usually this was Skullcrack, deal 3 damage, they can't gain life in response to them gaining life, or you had a bunch of prowess creatures or a couple of measly goblins or something, and you dealt 3 damage to their dome and turned all your 1/1s into 2/2s, and it was 2 mana for like 7 damage, and it was absurd.
Yeah, it was the sick rates that we hadn't really gotten before. That you may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield is just like...
Never paid off.
Guys, really?
Well, what really pushed this card over the top was that we were in a metagame with prowess, and so even now, it still sees play in the burn decks where you're playing your Monastery Swift Spears, and so not only are you getting domed for 3, but on top of that, they're getting bigger. Like this card can close out games very, very quickly.
Right, with prowess, essentially, you get 2 triggers, quote unquote. You get the prowess trigger, but you also get the +1/+1 mode.
It just happens so fast.
Yeah, super, super sweet. All right, let's see. So that's your number 4. My number 4. Oh my goodness, this card snuck up on me, and I was not expecting it to be as sort of widely played as it was. This is definitely a tournament-worthy card at this point. This is a very powerful pump spell. This thing has seen play, I want to say in Modern, maybe even all the way back to Legacy. It's extremely powerful in that it does a very unique thing. It's difficult to give your creatures hexproof in a efficient manner. And it's also hard to find a way to give them hexproof and pump them in an efficient manner all at once, like you could in Kaladesh with Blossoming Defense.
Blossoming Defense, yep.
Blossoming Defense is 1 green for a uncommon instant. That target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains hexproof until end of turn. And that's what it does.
This was my number 9.
Nice.
Yeah, this card was absurd. It was it's very rare that pump spells make it into like the best decks in the format, but this was a staple of the Sultai Energy decks. I think it was Seth Manfield won the Pro Tour. And you have your Blossoming Defense to essentially be both a counterspell and a pump spell. You were able to Vines of the Vastwood without having to pay the extra kicker and still get that extra damage.
Right.
This is such a great rate. It did everything you wanted it to do. It let you win those mid-range battles in combat. It let you counter Fatal Pushes or Vraska's Contempts. It was just spectacular.
Yeah, and easily slotted into the Infect decks. They're now running this now because why wouldn't you? It does everything they want to do in terms of protecting their creatures and buffing them and feeding Delve at the worst for Become Amends.
Yeah, this is sort of your go-to, like, oops, I got it. Sorry, whatever you're doing to interact with my creature doesn't matter anymore. And that to me was super duper powerful, and I was just not expecting. I was like, wow, Blossoming Defense is in this deck. It's in that deck. It's this high ranked on EDH rank and stuff. And I'm like, wow, okay, well, this spell's awesome. I'll take it. That said, let's move on here to number 3. Mine is higher on someone else's list.
Mine too.
And Ruben?
Well, I guess I'll see it number 2. Mine is also higher on somebody else's list.
And swoosh, there goes number 3. Right by everyone. Okay. Let's talk about our number 2. Ruben, what's number 2?
My number 2 is not higher on somebody else's list. It is, however, banned in, I believe it's the Pauper format. It is one of the more busted cards. It's like, I think it's the only reason that Infect was a thing in Pauper for a while. It is just an insane... the rate on it is incredible. My number 2 is Invigorate. Invigorate costs 2 colorless and a green for an instant, except it doesn't. Because if you control a forest, rather than pay this spell's mana cost, you can have an opponent gain 3 life. Target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. Originally printed as a common in Mercadian Masks. This card is bananas because you don't care about your opponent's life total when you're playing Infect, and so you can have your opponent gain as much life as they could possibly want. Go ahead, go to 23 and make my 1/1 a 5/5 with Infect and take away half of your poison total in one fell swoop.
Yeah, this is usually the card I will therapy for if I'm playing Legacy Infect because it's the most dangerous one by far. It's just like, you gotta take it. And it's free. It's effectively free.
Yep.
Like it's 100% free in that deck because there's 2 axes to attack you on and only one do they care about, and this one affects the other. This was my number 9. I couldn't not go without mentioning this thing. Invigorate is nuts. This card is weird. It's both weird in that you can see like how terrible Mercadian Masks was. Like it was trash, y'all.
Yeah.
But later
Mercadian
on,
Masks.
I'm sorry.
Uh-oh, red zone.
Well, you know.
It's not good.
He was young. It's okay. You make mistakes. Invigorate, but looking back, it's just really bad. And Invigorate is one of those things you can be like, oh wow, really? Like that was their alternate cost, was you to get all the benefit but one? Okay. And later it can get busted because you don't care about their life total, but that's weird. I love the spell and its power level, you know, but it's just absurdist when you think of like, what were they doing in Mercadian Mask with these weird life gainy, but you get it free, but you don't, but you kind of get a bonus, but you don't.
Yeah, the free spells in Mercadian Masks were...
I always use a Reverend Silence.
Yeah,
Where
Reverend
you're
Silence.
like, yeah, you can gain some life and I'll destroy your ley lines for free.
Yep,
It's fine.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they experimented with how do we call back those free spells from alliances and have them be fun and interesting, and we have things like Saprazin Legate and Vine Dryad and and then there's just broken stuff like this and like Misdirection and Daze, for example, in that block. So
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Aaron, what's number 2?
I'm going to rap to kind of introduce my number 2. So just get ready here. Look.
Well, here we go.
Do you need somebody on the turntables?
Possibly.
Some
You can
beats?
jump in if you feel I'm slipping. All right, here we go. Upside down and inside out. I'm about to show you folks what it's all about. I'm taking it back to the old school because I'm an old fool who's so cool. If you want to get down, I'm going to show you the way. Hoof! There it is. My number 2 is Crater Hoof Behemoth.
Nice.
So Crater Hoof Behemoth is 5 colorless and 3 green. Is it a creature type beast with 5 power and 5 toughness from Avacyn Restored with haste? When Crater Hoof Behemoth enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures that you control. Did you know this is like a $40 card?
Yeah. Mythic
so
from a set nobody
it's
opened.
Mythic. So this is the big finisher in Elves. If you play Legacy Elves, you just natural order for this.
Yep.
And then all of those crappy 1/1s and the Dryad Arbor that you have laying around are now suddenly really big. And they all get to attack and they have trample. You can see the impact that this card had on green fatties since then, because we don't get anything like this anymore. We had like Decimator of the Provinces, but that was like a hard +2/+2.
Raise Forerunners.
And raise
+2/+2.
Forerunners.
Yep.
Yeah, but so going forward, you can see
Yeah.
that they're capping this. They're not giving you X's anymore
Right.
because, green is very good at spitting out a lot of crappy creatures that suddenly aren't so crappy anymore.
Yeah, Avacyn Restored is where this thing showed up. They reprinted it one time in Modern Masters 2017. It remains a $38, $40 card.
Still needs another reprint.
It definitely needs another
It's just
reprinting.
so over the top.
It
Like,
is.
I love it.
This card is it. I mean, if you're gonna have a creature that is a pump spell, this is the one. This one pumps the most. This is the most pumped up creature.
Yeah.
Yeah, and gives everybody trample. Like, really? Like, it's so banana. It's just such game over, It's
Dredge even ran this for like 2 weeks, like shortly after
man.
shortly after Force of Vigor came out, because we needed to figure out how many green cards we needed to run, and they were just like, we have a bunch of zombies, let's Dread return it. Like,
Love it.
very nice. All right, so let's move on here to our number 1 pick. Aaron, what's your number 1?
So my number 1 is also a card that is good enough to be banned in a format. I don't really play a lot of Pauper, so the Invigorate thing didn't mean a lot to me, because the one format I do play that Invigorate is in, which is Legacy, it's very much legal there. And so it didn't have the same impact on me that it might have had for other people. But as somebody who really loves Modern, the fact that my number 1 is banned in Modern means a lot to me, because I play a lot of Modern and I like Modern. We talked earlier about how there was this move to like make spells free between Delve and between in Invigorate. This was another attempt at making a card free, and oops, they broke it. My number one is Blazing Shoal. So Blazing Shoal is X and 2 red as an instant arcane. You may remove a red card with converted mana cost X in your hand from the game rather than pay Blazing Shoal's mana cost. Target creature gets +X/+O until end of turn. So Sam Black, I believe, was the one that was responsible for putting this card on the map during one of the early extended Pro Tours, I think
The
it
first
was.
modern
The first modern Pro Tour.
First modern Pro Tour, and he was pairing this with Dragonstorm. Who cares what Dragonstorm does, because you're pitching it to Blazing Shoal and pairing it with an Infect creature. And if you think Infect is fast now, just imagine how much faster it was when you were slapping a Blazing Shoal on something. The card is disgusting.
Like this was
a mono blue deck that he played Blazing Shoal in. Basically all you needed was an Inkmoth Nexus or a Blighted Agent, and then you had 4 Dragonstorms and a Progenitus. And the only reason you had those cards in your deck were to remove to Blazing Shoal, which was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, this was the Pro Tour, the first modern Pro Tour, where and Pioneer was a little like this, but it wasn't quite obviously as high as stakes, where Wizards is like, okay, we made this new thing, go break it. And pros were like, all right, here we're
gonna
go.
Do it. That's right.
And this was just one of the many ways the modern format was snapped in half multiple times. This is both, Ruben, this is your number 3.
This was my number 3.
And this is my number 3. So we both had it exactly the same spot, but you had it number 1. This card is definitely worthy of it. This is weird. Like, Betrayers of Kamigawa, wanted to do something kind of exciting. And what they was like, well, we'll do something free. We'll do free spells. People like free spells. Those are exciting. We'll do this X thing. Blazing Shoal, to be clear, was crap until that Pro Tour.
Course.
Like, it was Garbo. It's back to Garbo status, but it was like actually impressive at the time because it came out of nowhere.
It might be busted in modern now. Who knows? Maybe. I mean, you gotta
these days.
Who knows? I actually don't know.
Right. Like, if they were to unban Blazing Shoal, like, would anyone be worried? Like, scared? I don't know. Maybe.
I mean, we got these blossoming defenses to protect our. I don't know, man.
Maybe. I don't know.
Not a thought experiment I'm willing to put energy into.
I don't think it's a thought experiment we want people to have to suffer through.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is like, what is the upside of unbanning Blazing Shoal, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's going to stay there forever.
Ruben, what's number 1?
My number 1 is a kind of card like that, where when you cast it, the game ends. Like, there's no middle ground. Like, you cast this card, and you either have an answer, or the game ends. And this is, of course, originally from Limited Edition Alpha. It is the namesake of a lot of the decks that utilize the ability that wants this card. It was restricted at one point in 1994, but then was unrestricted in 2003 because the creatures that it worked with were not great.
They never were that good anyway.
They never were, but enough other cards were printed that they were like, all right, Infect players can have a little Berserk as a treat.
Before bed, it's fine.
Before bed. So Berserk is 1 green mana. It's an instant. I'm going to read you the original. Until end of turn, target creature's current power doubles, and it gains trample ability. If it attacks, target creature is destroyed at end of turn. This spell cannot be cast after current turn's attack is completed. Yeah, that's confusing. Basically, it's you attack with your creature, you pump it with your Invigorate, then you Berserk it to double its power, and your opponent's dead.
For 1 green mana.
For 1 green mana.
Yeah, this is my number 3. A neat little thing I forgot about with this deck is there was one time I was facing an Infect deck in Legacy, and I survived the hit, and I was so proud of myself. I was like, I had some blockers or something. But then the Berserk happened, the creature died, and I lost all my bridges. And I was like, well, that's annoying.
That's hilarious. That's a funny
but
side
I mean,
effect.
all of this for 1 green and a trample. And the green, it's very... It doesn't seem very green to destroy your own creature. You know what I mean? Like, that seems like a black thing. Like, it's just so weird.
Like, it seems almost like a black card in that it sort of kills itself, but also kind of a red card, right? It's so passionate, it kind of burns up in flames. So this was weird. This was, when I first got into Magic, this was a very lauded card. This was it was a restricted card. I want to say it was banned somewhere, but I guess it was just restricted. But all I know
it's also in From the Vault Exiled.
Yeah,
so it was so iconic for being overpowered that they put it from the vault.
Yeah, thank your lucky stars this thing wasn't on the reserve list.
Didn't they get reprinted recently? Was it Iconic Masters?
In Conspiracy Take the Crown.
Okay.
As a mythic. So
as a treat.
Yeah, as a treat. Before bed. It's fine.
Yeah.
But Berserk as a card was just this like lauded thing. Like they took it like after Unlimited, they didn't even put it into revised. Like they were just like, yeah, we're good. This card's way too powerful because it makes creatures not totally suck, and creatures must totally suck back then, like really bad. And so they've been able to kind of dole it out a time or two beyond that. And it used to be worth like, $100-something. Now it's sort of down to $50, and now it's down to like, $13 or $14. This effect is just not as exciting and ridiculous as it used to seem, really.
Yeah.
But that means it's still fantastic, and it's still my number 2.
It kind of reminds me of Hatred a little bit in that, you're putting all of your eggs in that one basket and just saying that if I can just get through, then the downside doesn't matter, and ultimately it's worth it.
And the real killer is that you can target their creature, take twice as much damage, but their creature's dying. So
right. So if they attack you with a Llanowar Elf and you're like, haha, I'm going to take an extra, but I'm happy with that. When it was restricted, it did make top 4 of Worlds in 1994 in Cyril de Foucault's Zoo deck, which also featured 3 copies of your number 1.
My number 1, the freaking G. That's where we're at. And then, Ruben, this is your number 5?
This is my number 5.
You couldn't get it higher than 5?
Listen, man.
Bruh.
It's
I
fine.
thought we left that behind in the pre-show.
Oh, wow. Here we are. Well, look, let me tell you, this is the OG. This is the OG so OG. They have yet to fully replace its effect at the speed that it works. Now, they've given you +4/+4 stuff at sorcery speed. They've given you +4/+4 for a mana if you've played a land this turn at sorcery speed. But they have yet to give you 1 green, instant speed, target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn, and make a card better than that. They've even color shifted it over to red, but they didn't increase that rate. Giant Growth is the OG original part of the original cycle of Lightning Bolt and Ancestral Recall, and of course Healing Salve, because that's the one we all remember.
Yep.
And
Dark Ritual.
And Dark Ritual, and what was the last one? Let's see.
What are we missing?
White, blue, black, red. The red was Lightning Bolt. Green was Giant Growth. I think that's all of them.
Got it.
Black, Dark Ritual, Ancestral. Yeah, we did it.
We got there. But Giant Growth is the OG pump spell. It's the number 1. They've gone back to it so many times. We've had, we've had so many printings. We're talking like dozens of printings, dozens and dozens, and there's a million special variations, and there's a Junior Super Series thing they made. There's a Japanese Junior Tournament thing they made at some point, and they brought it back all the way to War of the Spark, which I thought was amazing. And that's totally okay. Like it's still a good card. It was still played, and it was still powerful to this very day.
And it's the only one of that cycle that is safe to print now. We don't get Lightning Bolt anymore. We just recently got something that was close to Healing Salve. But you won't get Recall again. You won't get Dark Ritual again, but it's still safe to play Giant Growth. And to me, Giant Growth will always be the giant rat, just like nibbling on a skull or something.
Right. Not the giant Mowu, the giant rat.
No, the giant rat.
There's so many arts that are, multiples of them are iconic at this point. And it's so ubiquitous that this top 10 might as well be called the top 10 Giant Growth effects.
That's true. We have somewhere in them. They did a Texas promo of this thing. We're talking 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, 40, 44 copies of this freaking thing have been made. 44 different versions.
Wow.
That's amazing. That's incredible. And that to me is why it was my number 1.
Yep.
Because this might as well be the top 10 Giant Growths, which is pretty awesome. But that said, that is our top 10 pump spells. You'll see them on the screen right now for your review. Take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Ruben's top 10, and we want to hear from you about what card we did not talk about, and we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you.
Move here to our final slide.
I'm pumped about this episode.
Sure are. I'm going berserk. So I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, my co-hosts, Aaron Camel and Ruben Bressler, you guys for watching or listening, and hope you support us at Patreon.com/MagicMikes. Follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at Twitch.tv at Magic Mikes, on Twitter at Magic Mikes Cast, our Magic Mikes subreddit, and like the Magic Mikes page on Facebook. Talk to us privately at MagicMikesPodcast@gmail.com. Follow the audio-only podcast at MagicMikesPodcast.libsyn.com, or find us on iTunes and or Spotify, or join us here next week. Same time, same place, for another episode of Magic Mikes. Good night, everybody.